You're sitting in a meeting, or maybe a lecture, or you're on hold with your phone pressed to your ear. Your hand finds a pen, and before you've made any conscious decision, the paper in front of you starts filling with shapes. Circles layered over circles. Little boxes. A vine creeping along the margin. You didn't plan this. You're not trying to draw anything. And yet here it is, this strange evidence of a mind doing something quietly on its own. The interesting part is that this tends to happen most when you're actually trying to pay attention, when staying present feels like it requires effort. So what's really going on in those moments when your hand seems to move by itself? First, let's put something to rest. If you've ever felt embarrassed about doodling, worried that it makes you look distracted or immature or like you don't care, you're not alone in that concern. But the reality is far more forgiving. This is an incredibly common behavior, and for many people, it's not a sign of disengagement at all. It might actually be the opposite, a quiet attempt to stay connected to what's happening around you, even when that connection feels difficult to maintain. To understand why, it helps to think about what your brain is doing during low-stimulation situations. When you're listening to something slow or monotonous, or when you're waiting with nothing to occupy you, your mind doesn't just sit still. It wants input. It wants something to work with. And if the main task isn't providing enough, your attention can start to drift inward, toward worries, daydreams, mental tangents that pull you further from the moment. Unconscious doodling often functions as a kind of anchor. It gives part of your brain a light background task, just enough activity to keep you from floating away entirely. Think of it like a small weight holding a balloon in place. The doodling isn't competing with your attention. It's helping to stabilize it. This shows up in different ways for different people, and the reasons behind it can vary depending on the moment. Sometimes doodling reflects an attempt to stay engaged when the situation isn't giving you much to work with. You might be in a meeting that doesn't require your input, or listening to a presentation that moves more slowly than your mind does. The pen becomes a way of staying in the room when part of you would rather check out. You might notice this happens more when you care about being present, not less. Other times, it's less about the external situation and more about internal understimulation. Some people simply need a bit more sensory input to feel settled. For them, the subtle motion of drawing shapes provides just enough extra activity to help the brain function more comfortably. It's not about boredom in the usual sense. It's more like tuning an instrument, making small adjustments until things feel right. There's also a soothing quality to the movement itself. The repetitive motion of a pen tracing loops or lines can release low-level physical tension, the restlessness that builds up when you're sitting still too long, or the quiet stress that hums beneath the surface during difficult moments. You might not even notice the tension until you see the doodles and realize your body was trying to discharge something. For some, doodling becomes a way of processing thoughts or emotions that don't have words yet. A frustrating conversation might produce sharp, angular marks. A moment of worry might bring tight spirals. There's a reason certain shapes appear when your mind feels overloaded. This isn't a code you can decode with precision, but it can be a form of expression that happens below conscious awareness. The hand is doing something the mind hasn't articulated. Occasionally, doodling serves as a kind of incubation space for ideas. When the logical part of your brain is occupied with listening, the quieter creative parts can wander more freely. This isn't magic, and it doesn't mean every doodle hides a breakthrough. But there's a reason some people find their best thinking happens in the margins, when they're not trying to think at all. There's something worth noting about patterns, too. When the same shape appears again and again, spirals layered over spirals, grids repeated endlessly, it may sometimes reflect a desire for order in a moment that feels chaotic or uncertain. The repetition can be a small way of creating predictability when the situation around you doesn't offer any. But this is speculative. Context matters more than the shapes themselves. Which brings us to some common misunderstandings about what doodling means. Perhaps the most persistent is the idea that if you're doodling, you're not listening. But research suggests this isn't always true. For some people, doodling during a boring listening task can actually support recall, helping them retain more of what was said. The key is that the doodling remains light, a background activity rather than something that absorbs full concentration. Another assumption is that doodling is lazy or childish, a failure to focus properly. But it's often the opposite, an attempt to regulate attention rather than abandon it. The person doodling might be working harder to stay engaged than the person sitting still and staring blankly. You may have encountered the idea that doodle shapes reveal hidden personality traits, that circles mean you're nurturing or squares mean you're logical. This makes for entertaining content, but there's no reliable evidence behind it. The same person might draw very different things depending on the day, the mood, the pen, the paper. Context shapes doodles far more than some fixed inner trait does. Finally, there's the belief that doodling always interferes with learning. Sometimes it can, if it becomes so absorbing that you lose track of what's being said. But in many situations, especially low-stakes ones, it's neutral or even helpful. The relationship isn't simple. This raises a useful question. When is doodling helpful, and when might it become a form of avoidance? A few simple indicators can help. If you're doodling and you still remember the key points afterward, it's probably working for you. If it feels optional, something you can put down when you need to, that's a good sign. But if you find yourself missing important information regularly, or using the doodling to fully check out of conversations that feel uncomfortable, or if it starts to feel compulsive in a way that interrupts rather than supports, it might be worth paying closer attention to what's happening. There's no formula here. The same behavior can serve very different purposes depending on the moment. What matters is noticing your own patterns and being honest about what they might be telling you. So here's a small experiment, if you're curious. Over the next week, pay attention to when the doodling shows up. Not to judge it, just to notice. What kind of situations trigger it? How do you feel before and after? Are there moments when it seems to help you stay present, and others when it's clearly pulling you away? You don't need to change anything yet. Just observe. And if you notice that this habit, or any habit, is interfering with your daily life in ways that feel significant, talking to a trusted professional can help. Your hand moves without permission sometimes. That's not a flaw. It's just part of being a mind that's always trying to find balance, always looking for ways to stay connected to the present moment, even when the present moment isn't making it easy. Thanks for being here.